The following program is an original production of WICC PBS Chicago.
The pain is spreading as the state's budget battle drags on. From social services to state universities, money is drying up. Will that force Governor Rauner and Democratic leaders to make a deal? The Chicago Teachers Union prepares for a strike as school officials warn of massive layoffs early next year. Will Springfield ride to the rescue? And healing local veterans with art and music. How one creative therapy helps former soldiers cope with the scars of combat. Stay with us for these stories and much more tonight on In the Loop. Good evening. I'm Chris Bury. Illinois has entered its fifth month without a budget. And while Governor Rauner and key Democrats refuse to compromise, the financial crisis grows even worse. Some Illinois universities may have to close. Scholarship funds for needy students are frozen. The Lincoln Museum is shuttered. And hundreds of nonprofit services that rely on state aid are cutting staff and benefits.
Fund education! Tax corporations! Fund education! Tax corporations!
In Chicago and across the state, the grumbles are growing louder. This week, Colin McCahey joined the chorus of protest. The adult literacy program where she works is running out of money.
All over the city, people are feeling it. You know, adults who want to better themselves, who want to learn how to speak English, who want to learn how to read and write. They're unable to get the services that they need, and what happens to them? You know, their families are impacted, their livelihoods are impacted.
McGahey joined hundreds of activists frustrated with the deepening dysfunction in Springfield.
We've seen it. We know our neighbors, our friends, our people who care for senior citizens, care for children, care for people with disabilities. They're suffering right now.
Some protesters chose civil disobedience, blocking parts of the downtown financial district. Police arrested more than 40 people. The protests come as the budget deadlock cuts critical services to the bone. Eric Zorn is a longtime columnist for the Chicago Tribune.
And these are services that help poor children, that help the elderly, that help addicted people, that help battered spouses. I mean, these are the sort of things that we really rely on government to do. This is part of the government that's not being funded right now.
One of those services is Centro Romero, a Chicago nonprofit that helps immigrants and refugees. Since state funding has stalled, it's had to cut programs and lay off half of its staff.
Our adult education department has every one of our teachers laid off. So from there, of the 19 teachers that we had, we now have none.
Without state money, Centro Romero was also forced to give up one of its buildings. Now classes are jammed into a basement separated by temporary divider walls. The toys are all that's left of a child care program the agency had to cancel. Adult Education Director Dina Giacometti says that impacts the parents too.
Moms and dads who brought their kids to childcare in order to attend classes for 3 hours are not able to attend classes any longer.
The pain is spreading across the state. A United Way survey of 544 Illinois service providers found that 84% are helping fewer clients. 79% have cut programs. Emily Miller, who works for a nonprofit that helps children in poverty, says the long-term impact could be devastating.
That causes permanent loss in communities where these providers have built up networks and built up trust with community members. Once those doors close, that trust and all the relationships that they have built up over the years, that's lost.
Other casualties of the crisis are piling up. The State Museum is closed. Lottery winners are not getting paid. Neither are many vendors. The state will owe them an estimated $8.5 billion by the end of the year. Even 911 emergency services in some places are running out of money. But none of the political solutions is popular.
In order to craft a budget that balances out by the end of the year is going to require some major cuts and some major new taxes. And all of those are very unpalatable to people. We took a poll, there's a recent poll out, that shows that nobody wants to raise taxes, or the vast majority of people don't want to raise taxes, and the vast majority of people don't want to cut programs. They want magic, I suppose, to happen.
Columnist Eric Zorn is urging his readers to take sides in the Springfield standoff in order to help end it.
You have to read over what's going on and say, is this worth it? Is it worth holding the poor people of the state, the disadvantaged, the dispossessed? Is it worth holding them hostage for this agenda that Governor Rauner wants to? And there are a number of people who say yes, it is.
And coming up, more on the budget stalemate with tonight's panel, plus some other trending stories. The cash-strapped Chicago public schools are warning of massive teacher layoffs without more money from the state.
All roads lead through Springfield. We cannot solve this crisis without Springfield stepping up first.
We at the state level are not going to take action to help Chicago if Chicago refuses to help the state.
Meanwhile, the teachers union president is telling members to prepare for a long, cold winter on strike.
This is not the time to continue to play politics and bureaucracy at the helm of our children. Every child in this state deserves an equitable and equal education, and if teachers have to do what they have to do to get what's necessary for them to take back the classroom, I'm all for it.
And should transgender teens get to choose their own locker rooms? A suburban high school is accused of violating the rights of one student.
You want that individual to be fulfilled, but at the expense of the other 200, it's tough, really tough.
And joining us tonight are Michael Coolidge, host of the syndicated Illinois radio program, The Michael Coolidge Show, Nakisha Hobbs, principal at Village Leadership Academy, and Madeline Dubeck, chief operating officer for Reboot Illinois, and welcome everybody. So we saw in the segment piece there, starting up the show, Michael, all this pain. Is that enough to force Governor Rauner and Democrats to the table?
I think a lot of the protesting you saw there is misplaced. They should be protesting in front of Speaker Madigan's office and President John Cullerton's office. This mess that we have is like a boat that we're in, and we can all see the water gushing into this hole there, and we're just looking at each other saying, you can solve it. Can't you solve it? I think that Governor Rauner has gone out of his way to say that he'll make concessions, raise taxes. Nobody wants to do that, but he's willing to do that. The Democrats haven't moved at all with any concessions whatsoever, and that's where I think the blame lies.
Nakisha, a lot of these programs hurt poor people. Is their megaphone too small to make a difference in moving the political needle here?
Well, first of all, I think I would first like to respectfully disagree. I think that what's happening in these negotiations right now is that the most vulnerable populations are being held hostage around issues that have very little to do with the services that they need to survive. And so I do think that we have to continue to apply pressure on Governor Rauner's office. Specifically, I've been working around the issue of child care, where as of July 1st, the governor enacted an emergency rule where less than 10% of the families who would normally qualify for the child care assistance program qualify now. That was a unilateral decision that Governor Rauner made, and at this point it's starting to feel like he made that decision to intentionally hold the most vulnerable people in the state hostage. And so yes, I would love to see Speaker Madigan and Cullerton, who I've been in conversations with both of their offices, specifically around the issue of child care, but at the end of the day, the governor is really holding the poorest and most vulnerable people in this state hostage for issues that have very little to do with it.
And Madeline, now it's not just the social services, it's not just child care. We're hearing from the president of Eastern Illinois University that he might have to close the university in the spring. Northern Illinois University says it's also running low on cash. Will the closing of universities, will that be the leverage that forces some kind of a deal?
My alma mater, in fact, Eastern Illinois University. I think that all of these things have to converge and the pressure has to build, and maybe it will take a teacher strike in Chicago. I'm less concerned about who people choose to blame because it takes two to tango, and we've got to get both sides to sit down at a table and start talking to one another, because you may think that it's just children who are being hurt now or mentally ill people. We're all going to be hurt when we get the bill, because the bill is coming, and the longer this goes on, the bigger the bill becomes and hits each of us in the wallet.
And you say you want them to meet. They are, in fact, meeting next week. Governor Rauner, Madigan, and leaders. And yet, Governor Rauner is already downplaying expectations for this. Michael, why do you think that is?
I don't know why he's downplaying them. I think it will be really good to see both sides on TV. You're going to have a television camera. We can watch it live on the internet or on whatever broadcasting networks are showing it, and see who is actually making concessions and who actually is willing to compromise on this and who's not. And I think we're going to see that the Democrats, specifically the ones who were in charge for all the time before Governor Rauner came into office and the ones who got us into this mess, aren't doing anything at all to extend that olive branch to Governor Rauner and come to a conclusion here. Governor Rauner is making concessions. They're not, the Democrats.
This is why nothing's going to happen, unfortunately, until January, which is what Governor Rauner also said at that same event, because in January they can vote something through with a simple majority instead of an extraordinary majority, which, it takes less votes, easier to do. But it's also, unfortunately, become all about politics. None of them want to admit this, but they're not going to know who has a competitive primary race until the end of November. And then there's always challenges to other people.
So we're not really going to see any action probably until the next year.
I'm afraid
Meanwhile,
not.
here in Chicago, we've got a parallel problem. City schools. The head of the city schools, Forrest Claypool, has come out and said that without $500 million from Springfield for a pension payment, that there will be massive layoffs, up to 5,000 teachers and employees. What are the chances that Chicago is going to get that money?
I wouldn't personally be for it, and I know Chicagoans don't want to hear it. I'm a former Chicagoan. I'm a former property taxpayer in Chicago. The answer is not Springfield. Chicago runs its own district. It has its own pension system. Chicago made this bed. They need to sleep in it. Those of us who live outside of Chicago and pay our own taxes, have our own schools to fund, have our own teacher pensions to fund. This is not, I hate to say it, our problem. It's Chicago's.
Does that mean a strike is likely?
I think a strike is likely, and I think that if Governor Rauner continues to squeeze people in the way that people are being squeezed, that we will see a strike happen in the city of Chicago, and we'll see service providers like child care providers actually joining into those efforts. We like to blame, and I definitely think that the Democrats who were in office before Governor Rauner showed up have to take some blame, but a lot of that blame also has to be placed on the fact that the Democrats didn't do what was necessary to generate the type of revenue that the state really needs to function. So in the state of Illinois, we really have a revenue problem, not a spending problem, especially as it relates to the pension and the pension payments. City of Chicago teachers, I'm a teacher, I'm an educator. We deserve pensions. We deserve to be paid for the work that we put in. And the pension bill here in Chicago is no higher than the pension bill in other places throughout the country.
But the Chicago public schools are $500 million short. Madeline, where is that money coming from?
Well, it's going to be very difficult for it to come from the state when the state is $8 billion in the hole by January. So, some sort of accommodations are going to have to be made. What that is exactly, I don't know, because we've already had a Supreme Court decision telling us that you can't tinker with pensions. But, again, the blaming doesn't help. Chicago, you're on your own doesn't help. Illinois needs Chicago, and people have to face this, and Chicago needs Illinois. And I think that's the point that Governor Rauner is trying to make. And he's counting on that pressure on Mayor Emanuel from teachers and others to help bring everybody to the table and cut a deal.
One casualty appears to be the relationship between Governor Rauner and Mayor Emanuel. We saw in all the papers last week, Governor Rauner sort of jokingly sending a dead fish to Emanuel. These were the guys who once shared expensive wine. Do you think that relationship is frayed, Mike?
It probably is, and it's not going to lead to a solution. I think what might lead to a solution, and I hate to say this, but again, I don't live in Chicago anymore, is property tax. Raising property taxes in Chicago. We have, again...
Which they just did.
Yeah, Chicago's just facing the biggest property tax in its history.
And they still don't have enough money.
Yeah,
and
but
that's
there's more room to grow.
In the state.
There's more room to grow. I live way out in a county west of Chicago. My property taxes proportionally are way higher than they were when I owned property in Chicago.
But you probably have better schools and safer neighborhoods.
Probably, yeah.
So is it worth it, the trade-off?
It might be, but I guess my point is that we keep asking, where's this $500 billion or $500 million going to come from? It might be, we talk about need more revenue, it might have to come from Chicago property taxes going up even more.
Yeah, I think the other thing, as we're talking about taxes, I think it's very important for us to figure out ways for everyone to pay their fair share of taxes. And so I know in conversations that I've been having with Senator Hutchinson, and this is at the state level, but just thinking about taxes and the budget impasse, is around a transaction tax, a stock market, or charging
Mayor
a transaction.
Emanuel has said there's absolutely no way he's going to go for that.
Well, when I go somewhere and I use my credit card, I swipe, I pay a transaction tax. I don't understand why people who have access to the most amount of resources don't have to engage in that same process that I have to engage in, especially when it can generate billions of dollars and help Illinois get out of the mess that it's in.
Madeline, the mayor's argument on that is that the financial companies then will just leave Chicago.
Which would be devastating to the city of Chicago. So that's a pretty tough sell, I would think. And frankly, you know, the mayor's supporters are a lot of those same people.
Although, but it's interesting that you mentioned that, because Karen Lewis, the teachers union president, has said that if there is a strike this time, she's going to picket the financial district.
Yeah. Well, I mean.
And you're shaking your head.
I can't see the financial guys leaving Chicago. They've built their lives here. They built businesses here. New York has a transaction tax, so it's not something that's unheard of. It's not something that's far-fetched. I think they'll stay.
Michael, last word on this one.
I just think the anger's misplaced. It shouldn't. The people at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange or whatever have absolutely nothing to do with this problem, and their anger should be focused elsewhere.
We have another big education story in the region this week, and that is the U.S. Department of Education has accused the Palatine School District of violating the civil rights of a transgender student who wanted to use the girls' locker room. And just to be clear about this, this is physically a boy, but she plays on the girls' sports teams, and the feds are saying, look, she's got to be in the girls' locker room. Madeline, what's your thought on this?
It's a very difficult and I'm sure controversial situation. Apparently there are plenty of parents who don't want to see that person in the girls' locker room, but she is transitioning. She's got a passport that says she's a girl and lots of other identification. The school accepts her as a girl. So, you know, they've just kind of put a scarlet letter on her forehead by, you know, not giving her the same choice as the other students.
Although, Nikisha, the school says it offered a compromise, and that is to put up kind of a divider in the locker room, and says that other transgender students are fine with that.
Well, I think the first thing we have to all be comfortable with in this day and age is respecting the way that people identify. We have moved away from gender being this binary category where it's just male or female. People have a right to identify in the ways that they want to identify, and we have to respect that. And I just think that we're at a time in our society, a time in history where we're going to have to reimagine the status quo for something that's.
But Michael, a lot of parents have come out and said, look, I don't want my 14, 15-year-old girl to be in the locker room with somebody who's physically not a girl.
I think the school district has bent over backwards for this student, and I think the thing that bothers me the most is that the federal government stepped in here and tried to enforce their will on a local school district. If the school district seemed to solve this issue, they were being very accommodating, I thought, not just to the transgender student, but to all of the other students who will be using the locker room, and respecting their privacy and integrity as well. So I think the balance is good in the district itself, and the federal government should butt out.
You know what? I played basketball when I was in high school, and I don't remember a single student ever liking going into a locker room and having to change clothes. And, you know, let's get some stalls and some shower curtains and just let everyone undress and dress in private. I don't understand why that is so difficult.
In the meantime, the feds are coming down with a hammer, though. This school district could lose as much as $6 million in federal funding, so the consequences are real.
Yeah, and I think we have to make sure that no child feels isolated or singled out. And so it's just time to reimagine. And maybe it is, like she said, having restrooms that are, you know, you go in, or locker rooms where you go in based on the gender that you identify, and it's set up in a way that is accommodating to every single student in the school.
I think you can be pro-gay marriage, pro-LGBT rights, pro-live and let live, and have a problem with your high school daughter showering in a locker room with somebody born with male parts, however they identify it with.
Finally, we want to move on to Spike Lee. After much hullabaloo here in Chicago about the name of his new movie, Chirac, he's showing the trailer of the movie, which is going to come out shortly. Let's take a look at this trailer.
This is an emergency.
Homicides in Chicago, Illinois have surpassed the death toll of American Special Forces in Iraq.
Hey, Ptolemies.
Welcome to Chirac.
Well, not to judge a book by its cover or a movie by its trailer. Initial reactions, we'll just go down the line here. Michael?
I loved Do the Right Thing years ago. I think it's one of the best movies of the 80s, and I don't think this is going to reach the same caliber as that. Spike Lee's a really talented filmmaker. This just looks a little sex rompy and political for my taste. I think if he wanted to make a difference with this awful, very serious issue of gang violence in Chicago, he should have filmed a documentary.
Nakisha.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think what's happening here in Chicago around violence is not a joke. It's a very, very serious issue. I haven't seen a film. I'm hoping that the genius is buried in here, and when I actually take a look at it, I'm going to be blown away. But I don't think it's an issue to poke fun at.
You know, it's provocative, and it's gotten people talking, and that can't be necessarily a bad thing, even if you happen to disagree with it. So, you know, I also enjoyed Do the Right Thing, so I think it'll be interesting to see the whole thing.
What about the premise of this movie, which, as I understand it, is based on an ancient Greek tragedy or comedy where the women are withholding sex from the men in order to bring peace. And in that case, it was the Peloponnesian War. This time we're talking about the streets of Chicago. What about the premise there?
I'm for any solution that involves people taking matters into their own hands and not asking the government to always come in and fix things. If the government could fix this gang issue in Chicago and this gang murder problem with new gun laws, it would have been fixed already. So in that sense, maybe he's onto something.
Nakisha, what about this sex?
Yeah, it makes me a little uncomfortable, just because I think the blame for the violence that's happening in Chicago is not to be placed on women, and it's not to be placed on mothers in general. And so it makes me a little bit uncomfortable, but like I said, I haven't seen the entire film, so I'm looking forward to checking it out.
Madeline, very quickly, does this make some of the controversy about the name seem a little silly? Now we've had a 9-year-old and a 20-year-old killed this week in Chicago.
Without question, it's just unbelievable, and we've got to figure something out here. The name is meaningless at this point.
On that note, we have to wrap things up. Thank you very much. Thanks to our guests, Michael Coolidge, Nakisha Hobbs, and Madeline Dubeck. Some soldiers returning home from combat must confront a new adversary, post-traumatic stress disorder. Here in the Chicago area, some veterans are finding peace in art.
Well, it's a lot to say about the soldiers of the sand, pushing forward in the heat of hell to protect our homeland.
Vietnam veteran Joe Class is paying tribute to the soldiers of Operation Desert Storm. Every Friday morning, vets such as Class gather at the Lavelle Federal Health Care Center in North Chicago. Their mission? To help each other defeat a common enemy, PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder.
Post-traumatic stress disorder is much more scientific than it has been. Throughout history, people have suffered after disasters, hurricanes, wars, violence. When people have post-traumatic stress disorder, they have re-experiencing phenomenon, nightmares, intrusive thoughts, flashbacks.
Even more disturbing is the high suicide rate among veterans who have served recently. The Veterans Administration says those who served in Iraq and Afghanistan commit suicide up to 60% more often than other adults. Clinical psychologist John Blair says combat veterans are far more likely to suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder.
We presume that people who are in significant combat, that 25 to 30% will have some level of PTSD.
Dr. Blair has been treating PTSD for nearly 40 years. In the early 90s, he came up with a way to help veterans cope through music, poetry, art, and comedy.
All I did was tell her.
Love me tender.
George Gandhara spent 23 years in the Marines and Army National Guard. After serving in the First Gulf War and deployments during 9/11, Hurricane Katrina, and Hurricane Rita, Gandhara was diagnosed with PTSD in 2004.
The first time I saw a Marine get killed, I was 18 years old. One of my fellow Marines, I got wounded in the head. The first time you see somebody that's really hurt and there's not a damn thing you can do about it, it really makes you, wonder what the hell, what am I doing here, But I guess that was the first part, because that really got me.
Donna King entered the Army in 1976. While serving, King says she was sexually assaulted. Years later, King came to realize she was suffering from a similar form of PTSD, military sexual trauma, a disorder resulting from sexual harassment, assault, and rape.
I started using drugs, alcohol. I went from God's house to the crack house and just wondered for years. And so 30-something odd years later, when I come here to North Chicago, I find my doctor and I told her what happened to me, and that's when she started me on the path to getting the help that I needed.
King has written a book aimed at helping emotionally and mentally injured vets cope with trauma. Like other veterans here, she credits expressive arts therapy with helping her handle her PTSD.
We're all like one big happy family. Everybody starts to come alive. We all start to come alive.
Since they've been able to teach me how to deal with my anger and my alcoholism, thoughts of suicide, all the horrible things that, just go in a person's mind when you've been somewhere and you've seen something that's evil, and you can't deal with it. I owe them everything.
God bless the USA.
And in a salute to our veterans, on Tuesday, November 17th, WYCC PBS Chicago presents a free screening of the new Rick Burns documentary, Debt of Honor: Disabled Veterans in American History. Please join us at the Logan Theater for a reception at 6 p.m. and screening at 7. To RSVP, go to wycc.org. And in celebration of Veterans Day, we invite you to watch an original WYCC production entitled Chicago Sinfonietta United We Stand. This classical concert pays tribute to veterans through music and images. It premieres on Veterans Day, Wednesday, November 11th at 8 p.m. right here on WYCC. Well, that wraps up tonight's program. For more about our topics and guests, check out our website at wycc.org and link to In the Loop. Until next week, I'm Chris Bury.